Hello, Dr. Jimmy again with All Secrets of Halloween Horror Nights 25 Revealed, Part 2. That's right, this is the second of today's wonderful videos where I, as I do every April 1st, tell you what's going to happen at the event this year. Now, as I just said, this is the second part. You have to go back and watch the first part first before you watch the second bit. Otherwise you're going to get yourself in reverse, and that's silly. Watch part 1, then watch part 2. After that, watch part 3 if there is a part 3, and there might just be if I can't get it all done within the 15-minute parameter. So, to continue then, as I had said in the previous video, Art and Design had all sorts of nifty ideas for the event this year, and then once again they were told they had to go back to the drawing board as a directive came down from somewhere above the chain of command, perhaps from Comcast or perhaps somebody over on the West Coast at Universal. Whoever it was, I have no idea. They don't tell me everything. But they had to change things. It seems, you see, that those people involved in figuring out these sorts of things have been looking at those surveys. As some of you may be aware, every year as you leave the event on any given night of Halloween Horror Nights, there's some nice people working at Universal, the team members, who will stop and annoy you to get you to fill out a survey. Could you please fill out the survey? And those of you who bother to do so can help them to decide what works and doesn't work at the event. You see, that's a very useful tool for them, and they do pay very close attention to what's told. Well, looking at the surveys from the past few years, they noticed something surprising. A disproportionate number of surveys had been filled out by guests who were not citizens of these United States of America. No, quite a lot of them, much more than anyone had ever imagined, were filled out by those persons who happened to be royal subjects of Her Majesty Elizabeth II, Queen of the United Kingdom. Yes, indeed. A lot of British guests have been filling out these surveys, and they decided to do some additional research, and they found that indeed a very large number of guests come to Universal every year from Britain, crossing the pond just to go to Halloween Horror Nights. Who knew? Not only that, but a lot of them come to Universal throughout the whole year. In fact, and they continued doing this research, they found out that there was indeed a veritable colony of British persons living right here in Central Florida, especially in Kissimmee, of all places. Indeed, there are many establishments, pubs and restaurants and shops that cater specifically to British people, with the sort of British foodstuffs that are difficult to find in the United States, right there in Kissimmee, in that area. In fact, not only this, but they have found that there have been surveys and lists made up by people who do that sort of thing, that the Greater Orlando area is considered one of the top 5 most British cities in the United States. You'd think we got away with being colonized by Britain back in 1776, but I guess not. There's still a bit of sort of colonizing going on here, and indeed, even if you go to say a Publix grocery store, anywhere in the Greater Orlando area, even up here in Winter Park or over in Orlando, you'll find a section in the store where they sell British food products, because there's an actual demand for these things. There are people who do buy Marmite and Hayward's pickled onions and and Branston pickle and all sorts of things that Americans have no idea what the hell that is. You know, people who drink iron brew, of all things, here in the United States. You can find all that at your local Publix. Amazing, isn't it? Daddy's brown sauce, all that stuff. Even Spotted Dick, tinned cans of Spotted Dick. Amazing. You can get a little tin of Spotted Dick and enjoy that for yourself. You think you'd have to go to one of those naughty shops to get a Spotted Dick, but no, you can get one right at your local Publix. Amazing. So we have all this lovely stuff. Furthermore, they've noted, of course, the extraordinary popularity of the Harry Potter attractions, both at Islands of Adventure and at the newly recently opened Diagon Alley at Universal Studios Florida. And it's not just American Potterheads that go there. The British guests really like it, and it's become extraordinarily popular. And so they decided then, after considering all these things, after a couple of years of research, that with the very high number of British guests who enjoy Universal and Halloween Horror Nights every year, that this is a very significant demographic and it really needs to be addressed. Therefore, they decided, as perhaps a bit of an experiment, I don't know, but they thought it would be highly profitable and a good idea, that this year at least, Halloween Horror Nights should be constructed and designed specifically to cater to British guests. And so they told Art and Design, make the thing British. All the houses and scare zones and the whole theme of the event should be British-centric, Anglo-centric, so to speak. And so that's what they had to deal with. And so they had to go back to the drawing board and start changing the whole thing up. Now, they had a problem, of course. They'd already decided that they were going to bring Jack the Clown back as the icon. And so they had to think, how can we change that up to fit a new British theme? Now, they had had some difficulty with the whole idea of bringing Jack back in the first place. After all, they tried to get rid of him altogether back in 2010. The original idea for the 20 Years of Fear, those of you who might recall, was to have Cindy take over as the new generation of Halloween Horror Nights, and she would actually had a ritual where she burned the effigies of the 5 other icons, thus destroying them completely and taking over. However, for some reason, again interference from somebody up high, the whole idea fell under, and they had to replace little Cindy with fear itself. And of course, and the idea was that the 5 icons somehow were part of an elaborate ritual that caused fear to enter our world. Thus it was revealed in 2010 that the 5 icons, Jack, the caretaker, director, storyteller, usher, were in fact not just those people. They were in fact some sort of avatars, earthly incarnations of ancient spirits that were minions of fear itself. Lesser demons that work for the greater demon of fear, Daru from Sumeria, or wherever it was supposed to be. And these were then spirits of chaos, death, sacrifice, legend, and vengeance, who brought fear into the world through a sort of ritual involving burned photographs being arranged in a sort of shape that lantern, it was all legendary truth that year, but we don't need to go over that now. But they then were there with fear in the scare zone, but afterwards fear put them all back into the lantern as their job was done. And the idea was that new age of darkness, and we would have entirely new ideas in this new phase of Halloween Horror Nights, that the iconic era had passed. And that was the original idea. They'd have all new interesting icons and themes, and they tried that in 2011 with Lady Luck after all. But then, oh yes, once again, we had some strange developments when Comcast took over and started changing things up. And of course after that we had several years now with no icons whatsoever and all IPs and Walking Dead shit, but that's not what they wanted to do this year. So they tried to kill Jack off before, and they thought, Jack off, they thought that, well, maybe, as a cat, have to pet the kitty, maybe they could find a way to get him out of the lantern. But now, with this new directive, they thought, well, we have to change Jack completely, somehow, but still be faithful to Jack. But here's an idea. Now, we can come up with a scenario using this whole British idea of finding a way to bring Jack back. And so they started those with especially people like Rick Spencer and other people who are really good at creating funny backstories for everything, started working very hard on how they were going to bring Jack back out of the lantern, and they came up with a nifty idea. What if these spirits, and Jack of course represented the spirit of chaos, what if that entity, that chaos being, had been on Earth more than once? Before there was Jack the Clown, was there another earthly incarnation of that crazy chaos creature who sometimes calls himself Jack with the mad grin? And they were thinking, and especially thinking of Britain, what if that notorious fellow who called himself Jack and wreaked utter havoc in London back in the 19th century, Jack the Ripper, and who had a rather morbid and macabre sense of humour, sending all sorts of jokes and taunting the police in Scotland Yard, taunting them with his letters and jokes, saying he was from hell and making nasty jokes. Jack the Ripper. What if Jack the Ripper were an earlier incarnation of this very same chaos spirit? What if Jack the Ripper was in fact an earlier version of Jack the Clown? That was a nifty idea, but they did have a little problem, of course, because they'd already established back in 2008 the idea that the Ho Ripper murders were part of the body collectors. But then they stopped. Well, wait. What is the most significant facial feature of the body collectors? A great big smile. That fits in. One of the body collectors was possessed by chaos and wasn't just a collector, but was a mad clown collector who put on the facial makeup, and unlike the others wasn't hushed and silent, just smiling, but actually made jokes and pranks and laughing and crazy. And that was the actual Ripper, and the others were just sort of his minions. And so this was the original Jack the Clown as Jack the Ripper back in London, with the other gentlemen with their smiling, happy, clownish faces. Pale white face with a grin, that's like a clown. All they have to do is put on the makeup. Yes, there he was. Clever idea. Jack the Ripper was, in fact, the earlier incarnation of Jack the Clown. And then, of course, those murders were never solved, and something happened, and that entity disappeared from our Earth. Perhaps the other gentleman got fed up with his noisiness and did away with him. And so after that, chaos incarnated into the Jack the Clown that we all know in America in the early 20th century. Until Dr. Oddfellow murdered him and put his body into that Jack-in-the-Box, which stayed for many, many decades. So, based on this nifty concept, they came up with this idea. While Jack was dormant in the Jack-in-the-Box, the spirit of chaos tried again to come back into being. He couldn't manifest immediately. He had to have a shell to incarnate. He had to be reborn. So he began to manipulate those whose minds were fragile, those whose minds were susceptible to the influence of chaos. And there was a gentleman living in London, or not rather, living in Yorkshire at that time, in the 1970s. A gentleman whose mind became warped by the spirit of chaos and fancied himself a new Jack the Ripper and began committing a series of atrocities. The notorious Yorkshire Ripper. And I shall continue, of course, in part 3.